Okay. Well, congratulations on your upcoming reissue of all the 1984 stuff you guys recorded. Um, it, it's really cool, definitely. But before I start, I have to tell whoever's watching this or whoever will be watching this how I actually met you guys, because it's a long time ago. So I need to date myself immediately to get this over with. But the reason
and date us, and date us too.
Yeah, we're all dated. But I think the only reason I'm talking to you guys now, 40 years later, is because of punk rock mail correspondence. And by that, I seem to remember I got a letter from Jimmy in 1983 or 84. Maybe the beginning of 84, I think, because you wrote me and said, hey, I'm in this band and saw your stuff. Maybe you could draw something. And I went, sure, because that's always what I did. And I wanted to hear as much stuff as possible because I was excited. And, that's what punk rock mail correspondence was able to bring. So it was pretty exciting. And I remember I sent my well-meaning but primitive artwork to you guys. And I even tried to do a logo that you guys were nice enough to use a couple times before you figured out the much better logo that you wanted for your
Brian. Well, now that I know that we had that logo in early '84. That was before we had a record out. You heard us? Did we send you a tape, or was it just like, hey, this is our band?
Yeah, you just went, here's our band. And I just remember thinking, that's a good name for a band. I like that. Yeah. And then when you sent the record after it was done, I remember playing it and instantly this feeling of relief came over me. Like, oh my God, this is a really good record. Oh, cool. Even better. So
it wasn't, this sucks. I'm glad they didn't use my logo on this record.
No, far from it. I was like, oh man. No, I was like, wow, this is really cool. But that only happened because of punk rock mail correspondence. And when did the record actually come out? Because I don't remember.
Beginning of June '84.
Okay, right. And Jimmy, were you the guy in the band that was the punk rock mail correspondence guy? Because every band usually had one person involved that was connected to writing to people in other scenes and other towns.
Yeah.
So that was.
I mean, my house was or my parents' house, and my bedroom was the office and also the practice space. So that's where all the mail came, and that's sort of where we ran it out of.
Right. So did everybody gather on days of practice to answer mail and stuff when things started picking up? Would you get, hey, we got a letter from General Biafra or from the guy from Toxic Reasons, want to come over and write something before I mail it out or whatever?
I don't remember that. Do you guys remember doing any of that?
Usually you would just do it. And a lot of times I would be there and we'd open the mail together and we'd maybe read it and trip out on it and marvel at the foreign currency, like, wow, yen, or like, wow, Deutschmarks or whatever. But usually Jim was the correspondence guy that was actually writing people back.
Right.
You had to write everybody a note who bought the record. That was common practice. That was good manners. That was good punk rock manners.
It was very good punk rock manners because we're all in it together. It's like, hey, well, here's the flyers. Here's the other band in our town that's pretty good too. And here's a flyer that I drew. And here's a mangled demo that I dubbed off of a double cassette deck for 50 times before I'm sending you your copy. I hope you enjoy it.
I used to have a handwritten thank you note from Mike Muir when I ordered a couple of Suicidal Tendencies records, T-shirts back in the day, but somehow I lost that along the way.
Did he write, thanks for supporting the suicidal scene?
Probably something like Stay Psycho or something,
Yeah, I was going to say it had to have the word psycho in it.
Yeah, probably Stay Psycho or something like that.
Yeah.
Hey Psycho from Psycho Mike Muir. When the record came out, I'll ask Randy this question. Randy, what was it like having a record out, and what you remember the reaction was like, not just around Atlanta, but just from picking up magazines and stuff? Was it exciting to be on? Whoa, this is my own record. This is great. I'm in this band. I'm on this record.
Yeah, it was super exciting because I didn't get into the band expecting to put out a record. You know, I got into the band because I thought we would, you know, play some shows and have some fun. And I related the story the other day where I had to get back to Young Harris College, where I was going to school, and I was going to Jimmy's house on the weekends, unbeknownst to my parents, and practicing. And I had to get back early once, and I got a letter from William saying that they had found a ride for me, and I should have stuck it out a little bit longer and not gone back to school right away. And I should have kept my PMA. I remember that because I was like, what is PMA? And that was when I was introduced to positive mental attitude. And he goes, you know, you got to get into this. We're going to put out a record, and the Demers are going to give us their car, and they're going to let us go on tour. And I was like, what? And a couple of months later, you know, we're going into JBS Studios and we're recording a record. And, you know, the beginning of June, you know, we had this thing coming out, and, you know, it was cool. And, you know, the way that people responded to it was really excellent. And I mean, it was great. It was a really great experience. And, you know, we did it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. What did the Maximum Rock and Roll review say? Teenage thrash with oddball.
Snotty teenage thrash with a creative spark.
Or something like that.
No, it was snotty teenage thrash with a creative spark was the first line, and then they went on. He went on to point out various things about the songs, like, you know, some unusual guitar intros and you know, like other little things that I guess made us stand out to him.
Was that, you know, from
at the time? That was Jeff Bale.
Jumpin' Jeff Bale.
Yeah, it was Jeff Bale, and at the time, we were not too pleased with it, because I think anything short of, you know, this fucking rules, you know, was going to be disappointing to us, just because we were so intense about the group. But looking back on it, I think he got it right. I really do. I think, you know, as I've said before, I think we were expecting him to review the band that we were by the time that issue of the magazine came out, because we were evolving so rapidly that we weren't the same band that walked into JBS Studios in March of that year. You know, just even a couple of months later, and surely by summertime of '84, we were, you know, going into other things, and we were moving in more adventurous directions. And also, we had gotten better at what we had started out doing. So in every way, we were improving. And I think we were expecting Jeff Bale to review the band that we were at the time the magazine came out, rather than the band that made that record. But as for the band that made that record, I think he got it pretty right.
Yeah.
That. Say what, Randy?
And I said, thankfully, Pushead came after that. And because you know, as William alluded to, when we came back, when we released the record, and then when we went on tour, you know, just in the space of a couple of weeks, the band changed, just because maturation, you know, and just being together. And so when we came back, I mean, we were ferocious. And then the Thrasher review came out, and that was rapid fire pistol pack bolts of hauling mayhem. And all of a sudden we were like, that's what we want to hear. That's what we want to hear.
And also keep in mind, or, you know, first gig, December 31st, playing a couple of songs like in the middle of Scream's set on New Year's Eve, and then recording on March 31st. So like that period was really short. And so we were a young band on the day that we recorded that record.
Yeah. And also the other thing that's always worth pointing out, when people in our age bracket get around and talk about things like that, things that happened a long time ago, one thing that always strikes me about talking about that stuff It's just that back then when you're young, even though it was like a short amount of time, it seems like it was forever. At least that's how everything felt to me, because I was just really excited to be a part of whatever this stuff was. So like every day,
nothing was ever happening fast enough. Nothing was ever happening fast enough. Nothing. It was ever happening fast enough for me. Yeah.
Yeah. But there was never a dull moment, even if it was like, oh, I got another really good mangled demo in the mail by some really cool band, and I get to write them back, and my buddy gets to get over, and then we get to go to practice, and we get to see this show next week. And it was just like all this stuff happened with that discovery, but it just seemed like time went on a lot longer than it really was. So when you say you played your first show at the end of '83 and then did the 7-inch pretty quickly afterwards, that makes sense.
Because we felt like, oh, it's time for us to make a record. We're ready to make a record. Maybe we were, maybe we weren't, but we certainly felt like this is what we got to do. And now we got to go on tour, like right now.
Yeah. Well, for sure, there were enough songs. And, it was time to document something, because my band prior to Neon Christ, AVOC, had never really gotten to document anything properly. And so one thing that was dead set on with Neon Christ was setting it to tape and setting it to wax, and I'm glad we recorded when we did and made the record that we did when we did. I wish we could have done more, but I think it's a good and accurate snapshot of where we were at the time, which is all you can hope for with any record.
Yeah, it was a good record. I mean, again, when I put it on, I was like, wow, great. Like, this is really good. So, William, did you just meet all these other guys at various points? Was it sort of your influence that got the band to come together so quickly after your previous band had disbanded? Like, did you just meet?
It was a matter of just really, really, really wanting to get something more extreme going. AVOC was a good starting point, but those two guys, Ricky Jackson and Roger Maynard, they were just neighborhood kids in the suburb that I lived in Southwest DeKalb, in Decatur, outside Atlanta. And so, I mean, literally, Ricky Jackson lived one street over. Roger Maynard lived, a street over and a little ways down. So they were just the only kids in my school that would give me the time of day. And I managed to convince them to start a thrash band, and a reggae band. And then we started playing gigs in the city, not knowing that there was nothing going on really, and still trying to elbow our way into gigs and into creating a space for ourselves. And that's when I started meeting the other people who came to form the really early Atlanta hardcore scene. And then, by some sort of fate or destiny, that was when the Metroplex came into existence on Lucky Street. And that was when some of the younger kids suddenly had a place to go, because the club before, the only club you could play before that with our kind of band was 688. And there were no all ages shows there, and everything was always a hassle. So when the Metroplex happened, that was where I could, not only play shows that were all ages for the first time, but also, meet Jimmy Demer outside, or see Randy Duteau with his foot propped up on the stage when I was playing in AVOC, screaming lyrics that, he didn't even know the lyrics, and he's screaming them. You know what I mean? It was like, and filing it away like, oh, that guy is nuts. He'd make a great frontman. He's really into it. And so that was what it was. It was just suddenly the scene starts coalescing. It was very, very, very small, but out of that, these connections came that led me to think like, okay, now I think I can move forward and start something that's more in line with what I've been dreaming of. And that was Neon Christ, because these guys wanted to play every day. Jim and I played every day from day one. And that was what it took. And especially when you're just trying to figure out your instrument. He was just trying to learn how to play the drums. and Danny was just trying to learn how to play the bass. And so we really needed to practice every day. And luckily they wanted it so badly, you know. And then when we got Randy, it was like, now we can really be a force live because he's so outgoing. He's going to go out and really translate the emotion that the music gives off. He's going to really be the lightning rod to translate that to the audience. And he's mobile. He can go out in the crowd if he wants, and he can, you know, you had the makings of a good live unit right out of the gate, you know, so it was great.
Right. Not to mention the fact that every other picture of Randy, if not all of them, is him in the air jumping super high. You need that kind of athletic lead singer to do that David Lee Roth kind of thing, and that's
he was everything that I wasn't. He was outgoing, athletic, you know, he was all, you know, and it was perfect. It was really perfect.
Yeah. So you basically just, I wouldn't say you masterminded it, but you just looked around and saw these guys and thought, well, we're friends and these guys will be perfect for this. And the nice thing about your band is that the one thing I always liked, I thought was really kind of sweet, is that you guys have been friends ever since the band actually broke up, which was like 85 or something?
86, early 86.
86. And not a lot of people, you know, I don't know a lot of people where I wrote a letter to some young guy in 1984. You know, I don't know a lot of people that have that experience of staying friends throughout several decades.
We're lucky. We're lucky. But, you know, those experiences that we had when we were, I mean, I was 14 when me and Will started playing, and not even 17 when we broke up. And that time period is so intense for any kid. And we had something that very few teenagers of that, you know, have, going on tour and doing creative stuff. I imagine the closest that most teenagers have is like being on a team and playing a sport. But our thing was a creative act, and that sense of possibility and that openness to creativity and hard work was like what really bonded me and Will from the start. You know, like I grew up in a creative environment, and I was perfectly happy that he wrote all the songs because I did other stuff in the band, you know, and when we came together, it was like this, you know, we were just immersed and could not have been happier doing that. And I imagine even for somebody like Will, who's had great success in the music business, like very few people do, the fun that we had in Neon Christ is probably pretty hard to surpass, even you know, doing those other types of things. Is that fair, Will?
For sure. And you know, there's no better way to come of age than like you just said, getting together with a group of like-minded kids your age, doing something that's creative, doing something where you really get to maximize a lot of your potential, and then also having that creative endeavor be something that puts you at odds with mainstream society. I mean, that music was so hated then, you know, I mean, and so to be a teenager and to be playing this music that almost all the authority figures in your life at the time cannot stand, you know, was amazing. I mean, like, that's about as good as it gets as far as, you know, being a kid, you know, going through that time, and you're like going through adolescence, coming of age, and trying to figure out so many things about yourself and about the world around you and the way it works. There were so many lessons that that I learned, or was at least forced to confront and contend with, that I'm still processing decades later. You know what I mean? About things that happened in that band. So yeah, it was great, man. It was amazing. Totally.
I understand too that when, you know, these guys were practicing every day, and I was up in college in North Georgia, 2 hours away, but I would come over to Jimmy's on the weekend, and all four of us would live together at Jimmy's parents' house. And so I would get there, you know, late Friday afternoon, and, you know, we ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the Demer house, and we practiced, we hung out. And so, you know, from 14 to 18 years old, and we're living together. We're just fully immersed in this thing. And it wasn't just like, you know, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. I mean, it's like we were together. I mean, we were bonded. And I mean, it was profound, and it had everything to do with not only, I think, how good we were or great we were, but also why 38 years later the friendship still exists.
Yeah.
It was a really exciting time, and definitely being able to be creative and find a place to put your energy toward those things into some newly discovered subculture, like a backdrop of creativity, whether it was music or art or, you know, making flyers, fanzines, whatever. But it was exciting in a way that's really hard to, without sounding like old guy talking about the old days. But, you know, I can't apologize for being the age I am and having that experience, but it was really exciting to have that experience, you know. And it's hard to explain that to people. And this is not meant to be a bad thing to say, but people that just weren't there or wouldn't old or old now, you know, it was profound and exciting. And the only thing that's really weird is just how much time has really passed. Like, think about before the Beatles came out, 40 years before that. And I think, William, you might have said something like this when I talked to you last year, and just flash forward that point from when your first record came out, and that's 40 years later, in the other direction. That's really weird, because time's like an abstract concept now that I just don't really want to measure. You know, I just can't be bothered to measure because it all just blends together now. But I will give this one to Danny. Danny, why were those times, looking back, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but why were those times back then? Why did it seem so important, or why does it have the legs, do you think, that it has now, where we're going to sit around 40 years later and talk about the Neon Christ record being reissued next month? Like, why are people so? Do you have any idea why people are so fascinated with what went on back then? Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was kind of a special time, and it was really the birth of something new, you know, because punk existed before, but the kind of stuff we were into, it was really, you know, that's when it just kind of got started. So when you're there at the creation of something, so to speak, it's always going to be romanticized.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I mean, the 60s generation that was so inspiring to us seemed like another world, but was only, you know, Jimi Hendrix had died, you know, only 14 years before Neon Christ record came out. It wasn't really that removed from the time, you know. To us it is, because we weren't listening to Jimi Hendrix when he was alive, but, you know, in other terms, wasn't that long after. Yeah.
It's just so weird, because, like, I don't really think anybody really thought back then of, like, you know, in 40 years, people are going to be really excited about the stuff that we did. You know, it's just it's crazy, but I think it's really great. But it's just like, that's something I still can't put my finger on. I think maybe one part of it also might be, you know, how, like, after there's that certain point that everybody has when they discover 60s punk, and it's usually after they went through hardcore punk. At least that was my experience.
Yeah.
Like, you're discovering this world that you weren't there to be a part of. And, you know, those Pebbles records, those Nuggets records, all those bands, Music Machine, whatever, you know, it's like, whoa, and it's long gone for the most part. And I kind of think there's a little bit of that in people younger, and maybe even older people, that just didn't experience those experiences. picking up on all this stuff. And now there's the internet, and you can research everything. So
one thing about it is that it ended up taking over the world, and it took a while, but once it happened, you know, it was mainstreamed in a way that very few things are. I mean, the only analog might be the hippie thing, you know, or the acid rock thing. Really, the way some of the '60s counterculture tenets, or the fashions, or the attitudes were mainstreamed. That happened with hardcore, and it's hardcore and hip hop were the last times that you could see sort of a real shift, not only in the sound of the music, but in the behavior of the audience, and in their response to the music. So I think that's part of it too. And as Danny said, when you're there at the dawn of something, it does get romanticized. That period of the initial spark does get romanticized. Just like, you know, 50s rock, you know, might get romanticized. But the thing that was great about our thing is that, unlike, you know, Little Richard or Chuck Berry or any of the stuff that came right before that was really exciting, like Ike Turner or any of that stuff, or unlike Hendrix and the Doors and, you know, Janis Joplin and all these other great artists from the late 60s, our thing had no commercial aspirations, really. And it was so underground. And it was the first time that I'm aware of, anyway, that the kids themselves actually seized the means of production. So you had kids who are 15 and 16 years old who are calling up pressing plants and making their own records and creating their own fanzines out of nothing, Xeroxing them, whatever, hand drawing stuff like you were, Brian, and getting it out all over the world. And, you know, then you got a kid who's, you know, like Jim did. He took Kurt from DRI's notebook of contacts and he hand copied it and started calling everybody so we could book our own tour. And that was the first time that kind of stuff, I think, had happened on that scale, where it was happening worldwide, whether we all knew of what was happening in a place like Finland, or whether they knew of what was happening in a place like, you know, Cincinnati. It was all happening nonetheless. And even though it was harder to communicate, we did have things like Maximum Rock and Roll, and we did have letter writing. So it was this really wonderful marriage of all these different things converging that were new and exciting and cutting edge. And I think I think that I'd probably be more surprised if that wasn't romanticized, especially now that we do have the internet and everything is at everyone's fingertips instantly, you know.
24 hours a day. 24 hours
yeah,
a day.
For better or for worse, you know, the work that we had to do just to even find out about another band's existence, let alone get their record or actually make contact with them. I mean, I remember the excitement of just getting somebody's phone number, you know, that I had wanted, you know, or like when Danny told me that he had Randy Duteau's phone number, you know what I mean? It was like, you know, I'd already had him in my mind, but, you know, oh, I got his phone number. Oh, killer. You know what I mean? Or like when you'd find out, you know, or like when Jello Biafra's writing you to get a copy of your record. I mean, that, you know,
that's exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting. You know, you could meet your idols.
Yeah, Jello Biafra's awesome. You know, it's like, I'm sure you guys must have at least one story of some minor punk rock celebrity that you called out of the blue. So let's who did you guys call out of the blue? There's gotta be somebody. Come on.
That we called out of the blue?
Sure. You know, like when you get a record and there's like you can get someone's number through either a pen pal or sometimes at some of these records there would actually be a record, like a fucking phone number. The person I called out of the blue for no reason at all was I called SST Records and I ended up talking to Spot, and he was really nice to me. And I just think that was another thing that I've remembered about those times is like you're putting a lot of trust in these people that you admire when you just call them up out of the fucking blue with no reason to talk to them. Absolutely no. There's nothing beforehand. So I'm like, Spot. Oh man, I'm a really big fan of all the bands that you record, man. And he was really nice to me. And you know, everybody has an experience of that where they meet somebody that they already admire, and just the fact that they were kind of nice to you back. It's like,
oh, it's huge.
Yeah, but we were always. I mean, one of the great things about that scene was every band that came through, like we were at the sound check, and even before Neon Christ in the very early days, anytime a band would come through, we would go down to the sound check and meet them. You know, I took Henry Rollins for ice cream. I told the Bangles we had a fanzine that we didn't have, but we were genuinely going to make it. We just hadn't made it yet, but we needed to interview the Bangles, and they were very accommodating to us. And we did a lot of that. And actually, we have we recently unearthed a tape of that we made on a boombox when we went to the Black Flag sound check in March of '84.
No, it would have been November '84. November. It was November 2nd, '84. I remember the date. Yeah.
Of course, you sure? Because I thought it was the time that. I thought it was the time. It was like the Clash was playing the same night at the Fox or something.
Well, the time we interviewed. Are you talking about the time we interviewed Henry? Like where I went.
Or the time that he yelled at us. The night of the Clash show, he yelled at us.
What happened was the March show when they were on the My War tour. We went down there and we're trying to do the thing that you did back then. Black Flag was playing the 688, and it wasn't all ages. And so went down there to make our case and make our plea, like, you know, hey man, you know, can you help us out? You know, we're huge fans, because I mean, we lived and breathed Black Flag. And his response, first of all, he tripped me out because when he came out to meet us, he had the fucking Korak Son of Tarzan hair going, and it was like, whoa, okay, all right, you know, so things are changing, all right, you know. And he had
and did he not have a shirt
shorts
on? He had that tattoo.
Yeah, he had no shirt. You know, he was just he was the Rollins persona that came to, you know, kind of dominate that, you know, 1984 and afterward period. And but it was our first exposure to it, and we're getting it full frontal in person. You know, so it was like, okay, wow, all right. And then so we made our case, and he just, you know, he did what was understandable. He was like, man, I'm, you know, kind of sorry. I don't know. You know, he had no control over this stuff. This was the club's policy. They're just there to play the venue and move on to the next town. So I was really, really upset. And he came out as a consolation prize and gave us a bunch of really, you know, like My War stickers and like all this other, you know, stuff, this swag that they were carrying with them. And I just threw it all over the doorway of the 688 and stormed off. And
okay, so the
next time that we met him, they came through town on Slippin' In, and we went down there again to interview him. And like first thing, like, you know, showed up like, hey, remember me? And he's like, yeah, I remember you. You know what I mean? And it was like, okay, cool. Well, we're here to talk, you know. And I wanted, because by then we had really absorbed the newer music that Black Flag was coming out with, and I wanted to ask him a bunch of really pointed questions about it. And we did, and it was really great. And then as we're ending the interview, Black Flag is on stage sound checking, and this is when they were, to me, at the peak of that sort of post-damage period. The sounds they were getting, the rigs they were using, it was just perfect. And they were playing a bunch of songs that weren't out yet, that would end up, you know, being on the In My Head record. And I remember in particular, you can hear on the tape as Henry and I are walking out from the dressing room to the main floor. He's like, I got a sound check, but he's rapping to me about the police brutality and all the different, you know, changes they were going through and how they were about to play with the Ramones at the Palladium in LA, and that show that ends up on the cover of the Get in the Van book. But he was rapping to me about all that, and in the background you could hear White Hot from Black Flag, and they were playing it in a different way, you know, because they were always changing. So in the way they were playing it that day at soundcheck, Bill Stevenson was doing all these fills in between all the pushes. So on the record in my head, it's very straight. You know, that beat is very straight. On the sound check tape, it's totally different, and it was really cool. And yeah, but I don't know, man. That was a great period. You talk about meeting people, meeting guys, whether it's a bad encounter like the initial thing that ends up becoming a good thing, because down the road from there, we were friends, you know, all of Black Flag. Henry Rollins slept on my floor in my bedroom. So I mean, it ended up kind of evolving.
Yeah, you asked good questions that day, apparently.
It was a great interview. I'll say this, I've never seen an interview like that with him. And so one of these days we really should try to put it out properly, or you know, maybe even release the tape or something, because I've seen a lot of interviews with him and with the band, but never any that got into it the way we did. Because we were, I mean, again, it was the product of a lot of absorbing of the music and a lot of studying of the music, and also with a background in the music that was inspiring them as well. So what they were doing was not coming at me from left field. It was coming from a place of, well, I know who you're citing there. I know what you're doing. I know the jazz influences you're citing, and I know the beatnik poet influences. Just, you know, I get it. And so we were able to ask these questions from that point of view, and it was really cool. And I think he appreciated it too. And I was also asking lifestyle questions that I don't think they were getting. Like I was asking, like, do you have health insurance? Like, how do you live day to day? Like, what's, you know, like all these really like geeked out questions, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And he was happy to answer them. Well, as you know, Black Flag were catching hell every day, and Rollins was the focal point for a lot of it, you know, for better or for worse. And so, and that was a lot of his writing, you know, at the time was trying to write that stuff out, or write those feelings out so that he could process them. But every show was confrontational. Every day was confrontational. Some of it he probably somewhat brought on himself because of his, you know, stance, his bearing, his defenses, you know, but a lot of it was, you know, very unfair. And they, you know, he talks about like people accusing them of selling out when they're living like maggots, and he's sleeping in the back of a Ryder truck, you know, in a coffin like space that he made for himself among the PA speaker cabinets. I mean, you know, selling out, you know, he's like, I live on $5 a day when we're on the road. And when we're not on the road, I live on nothing. I go and get jobs where I can, you know? So, I mean, it was a great interview. It was a good period. You know, and you mentioned Biafra, like, or you mentioned, who did you cold call? I don't remember us really cold calling anybody off the number of a back of a record. We were so far removed from everything in some ways that I don't know if psychologically we were up to like just phoning up, you know, hey, Chris Doherty from Gangrene, you know what I mean, or whatever. But
is this Mickey Offender?
We didn't have the phone list or the Watts line like Reed Mullen had.
Right, we didn't have the Watts line, exactly. Yes, exactly. And, you know, but there were things like these in-person encounters, and one of my earliest ones was with Biafra, because, you know, the Dead Kennedys were playing 688 in early '83, and as usual, I couldn't go. My band AVOC did not get the opening slot on that gig, therefore I couldn't even be on the premises, and I managed to sneak in anyway, and the manager of 688 caught me and tossed me out, he walked me to the front entrance where they had a payphone, and he made me call my mother, and he watched me while I did it. And, you know, because I can imagine that guy was probably going through a lot of hangs with the cops and all that. They're running the only kind of alternative counterculture club in the city, and he's probably getting hassled a lot, and he just didn't need the extra aggravation. So I dig it. But, you know, called my mother. She had just dropped me off not too long ago and probably just gotten home by the time I'm ringing her to come get me again. So she has to turn around, come back into town. In the meantime, I went out back of the club and was out by the dumpsters throwing rocks and whatever, and, you know, just being frustrated. And Biafra came out of the back entrance, and he was like, what seems to be a problem? I'm like, they won't let me in the gig, blah, 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 and they were underage, and blah, 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 I just want to see the music. And he's like, well, that sounds like South African style apartheid. And then he agreed to take responsibility for me at the gig. And so now I've got this amazing thing happen with, you know, the singer of this band that I admired so much. And this is no cell phones. This is pre all that stuff. So I had to go back to the payphone, call my mother again, but there was no calling her because she was already on her way. There was no reaching her. So had to wait till she got there, then bring her around the back of 688 and say, Mom, this is Jello, this is Mom, you know, and just these absurd situations that would happen only in, you know, in that period where it's like, he's agreed to take responsibility for me. Can I please stay? Can I please, you know? And to her credit, she let me do it. And Biafra was super cool. And in that instance, my mother was super cool. But yeah, I mean, you know, your idols taken up for you like that, it was a great thing. And he always treated these bands. I mean, he treated my band, AVOC, we were less than nobodies. You know what I mean? We had like a demo tape we made on a boombox with one mic, you know, for everything, for vocals and instruments. But he treated it seriously. And just like Maximum Rock and Roll would get inundated with every demo tape made in every basement in the world, and they would review it and they would try to take it seriously. And I think those people had a lot of grace to do that. They really did.
Yeah.
I think that was the great thing about that time, though, because you could just absolutely, you know, worship a band. And, you know, you'd know all the lyrics to their songs. You'd have all of their records. They would show up in your town and band would pull up and, you know, you sat on the front curb and you hung out. You know, you talked to your idols. You were friends with them. And then they went up and they rocked your face off, you know. And then like in the case with DRI, they took our demo tape and they went up the East Coast and they were telling everybody, you know, about how great they thought we were. And so when Jimmy starts making calls, you know, we'd already gotten a reference from DRI, you know, and it's like it didn't get any better than that. And that I think that was one of the remarkable things about that entire scene as it is too, you know, because people looked out for each other. They wanted to be introduced to new music. They wanted to make friends. And, you know, we don't have to romanticize it because it really was special. I mean, we're not blowing it up and making it something that it's not because it's 40 years later. It absolutely was that great.
I agree.
Agreed. Yep.
Well, you know, I never actually asked, how did this, anybody can jump in here, but how did the reissue actually even happen and why now? I guess, William, since the way it's going to be half released by you and half by Southern Lord, right?
Yes, that's right.
Why now?
Well, I mean, I just think that it was just time. And, you know, I think every year that goes by, you begin to treasure the fact that, first of all, that even happened back then, that everything we're talking about even happened. Then you treasure the fact that we're all still here, we're all still alive. And it just gets to be more and more of a question of, well, if not now, when? If you want to try to if you want to care for this music the way you believe it deserves to be cared for, then go ahead and do it. Don't wait anymore. And, you know, we've discussed various things over the years, over the last 10, 15 years or so, you know, about how to deal with the fact that we never recorded any of our later material, for instance, which we always thought was really, really kind of strong, and always regretted never having done that. We made a start to do it, but we never finished. We ended up getting one song, and even that wasn't completed. It was a basic track with a vocal, and it was damn good for that, but it was supposed to be the beginnings of an album, and that never happened. And then you know, within the last, again, 15 years or so, we've talked about, a documentary film and all these different things that have been knocked around as ideas and that have even gone to various stages of completion. But then when it gets to the music that we have already, that is here, that was recorded, that has been fixed in time for all these years, what about that, you know? And again, after a while, you get to this point. Yeah, what about that? Yeah, we got to, there's stuff that's already here and it needs to be taken care of. Those tapes are not going to hold up much longer. They're old. They've been, stored in all these various places. Like, I didn't even know if they would hold up now. Luckily they did, but I wouldn't have wanted to wait another 5 years. I'll say that. So that's why now I think a bunch of things kind of converged and lined up to confront you with, hey man, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, why not? And then right as I started, really committing to that idea, like I'm gonna reissue this stuff. Right then, Greg from Southern Lord also had the same idea. He was like, man, have you ever thought about, Neon Christ reissuing that stuff? So I was like, look, you know what? Why don't we just team up on this? And it's worked out well. I respect what Southern Lord has done. Southern Lord did a great job on the Blast record, the It's in My Blood reissue called Blood, that Dave Grohl remixed and all that stuff a few years back. So I knew him from that, and it just made sense. It's certainly for this record store day thing. It was like, yeah, it makes sense. So let's just do it. So it's been good, been really good.
Awesome. Well, you brought up a question I've always wondered about, and that's all not the second batch of your songs, but all that material that you had reference to, all those songs. You were talking about the song "Drawn In."
Mm-hmm.
That ended up on compilation, maybe. Is that?
It's been on various little that cassette that we walked out of the studio with has been bootlegged a number of times, and it's wound up on different like compilations, usually cassette compilations that were really prevalent back then. But yeah, that's all it is. It's a copy of a cassette, because we didn't even take the 2-inch master tape out of the studio because we thought we were coming back. We thought we were going to keep working on this thing. So I took the cassette rough mix, and that was all we had. And so everything that you've heard of that song or any compilation that it's appeared on has been some second, third, or fourth generation copy of that. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of the, you talk about the one that got away. That's one of the ones that got away. I wish we had been able to see that whole thing through, but
all those songs,
maybe one day we will.
Well, all those songs are really good. That one, Ricky or Graveyard Nest, whatever. Was there a song called "Run" by
Crush?
What is it?
Crush.
Crush. I always thought you were saying "Run," but you're saying "Crush."
Saying Crush.
Crush. One Day, the Cop song. Ricky.
Yeah, the boy. Yeah. Well, all those songs were really great. Real progression and stuff. And well, I'll make comments once in a while. Man, it's always too bad that those songs never got recorded, even though it's 40 years later. So having said that, maybe it's too early to say, but are you guys going to commit to recording all those songs? Because they're all really good songs, and is that something you guys?
I'm committed. I'm in.
Should we take a vote?
Okay, we got one. Danny, are you in? Some sweet bass playing on some of those songs, and also I always thought "Drawn In" was like a really great missing in action song. Like, man, this song is really good, and the way you sing it, Randy, is also really good. And also, there's even like I think you said one time, yeah, I do a little Henry Rollins kind of thing. Now things have changed. That kind of thing.
Yeah, that track was interesting because we went in as a 5-piece, and by the end of the first day we were back to being a 4-piece. Yes, and great guy, but he used to love his acid. He used to, I think he came into the studio on acid because that was, a fairly regular thing. And so, I was like, yeah, we just can't have this, So we ended up doing the basic track, with just a 3-piece, and then wanted to have Randy sing it. And that vocal is a great vocal. It was, you know, I put him through the ringer a bit.
I was gonna say
From the
you were the
controller.
master.
You know, it was one of those things, you know, where it was just like, I knew he had it in him, and so there was a little bit of a psychological game to kind of get it out. I wanted him to just get really mad at me, so then he would deliver on the mic, and it worked, and it was great. It speaks for itself. It speaks for itself, you know.
So you're short-lived. I mean, the only time I saw you guys was when you had Sean, your short-lived second guitar player, and that was when I met you guys officially, because I was with CSC at the time. And I was going to ask, whose idea was it to get a second guitar player for that little bit, and was it just really solely that one incident that, you know, we have this idea of like having like a Des Godina second guitar player, and you're ruining it, man. What are you doing acid? Was it just that sort of thing, or was it like, well, we have a nice thing with the four of us, so?
Yeah, I think it was hard for him to come in as an outsider into this group that was all very tight and very close friends who had already had, even though it had only been, you know, a year and a half of experience, it was really intense experience. And I think that was hard for him. And, you know, we wanted, a lot of the bands that we liked, like SSD, had this 2-guitar onslaught, and we wanted it to just be louder and bigger and badder. And it did that. But I think also when we went into the studio that time, studio doesn't translate in the same way with, you know, in a room where everything's just bouncing around and it's a lot of energy. And, you know, you're not watching it, you're just listening to it. And I think we recognized pretty quick that like the stripped down Neon Christ had all the guitar that you needed. And putting another guitar on top of that diminished the enterprise in a way. I'm not sure it was really so much a fault of the guitar player
Not at
as
all.
it was just sort of the context.
I really liked his playing, and a lot. And, you know, he was more from the metal thing. You know, he looked like he stepped right out of 1973, and he would, you know, wear the Scorpion shirt and all that. It was no irony. And he had this kind of Strat style guitar that he played, and it had a whammy bar on it. And he played an orange amplifier. He had a stack of orange. So 2 cabs in the head. I think it was the 120 watt head. And I really dug his sing, man. I thought it was cool. And his solos were real interesting, you know. And I think there was a desire to have somebody to bounce off of in that way, where you could trade leads and stuff. And again, as Jim mentioned, a lot of our favorite bands were doing it or had done it. Black Flag went through a phase of that, and, you know, Minor Threat went through a phase of it. SSD Control was a big band for us then. You know, and there were others, but, you know, but that whole idea of you could have these guitars playing off of one another, it was just appealing. But yeah, as he said, going into the studio was a different thing. And that's when all of the you know, all is revealed. You know, let's just say, whatever shortcomings you have, you walk in the studio and they're going to be magnified. And that goes for any band, you know. And then again, too, there were some lifestyle just differences going on there. But I thought he was a great guy, and I liked his playing a whole lot. And I'm glad we did it, for sure. I don't regret a thing. And I love looking at the pictures from that time too. You know, it was a great period.
Yeah. Since acid was brought up, I think I might have gotten this wrong, but I think, William, you told the story about driving through the mountains with the band after either on tour or after a show.
Say that again.
Is there any truth to the story that dropped acid and listened
No.
to My War?
Oh, there's no truth.
Yeah. No, that's
Right.
true. We went to go, I think we played a show with COC somewhere and it was like on a loading dock or something. And it was a road trip show. So it must have been maybe somewhere in North Carolina or
Oh
somewhere.
yeah,
I don't remember.
it was
Wasn't it the
Asheville.
show at the
We played with
church?
Subculture, Bloodbath.
I thought it was the
Bloodbath, I
church.
think.
I thought it was.
I thought it was the
show,
church
too.
because we went and we had 2 vehicles.
Was
No,
that
the
sta-
gig, the acid gig was Asheville. The acid gig was Asheville. And Jim and I drove back after the show we drove back to Atlanta from after that gig. And by that point, I think we were practicing in this place called The Exit, which was a little warehouse on DeKalb Avenue. And we used to practice there all the time. And we tried to have shows there a few times as well. And the cops came and broke them up and it was a melee and all that stuff. But the place, The Exit was run by these kind of like acid dealers. And I had gotten a hold of a tab of some blotter or something like that, and you're a kid, you just want to check out everything, you want to experiment. I mean, within reason. I was never interested in narcotics, but mind expansion stuff that held some appeal. And so I've been holding on to this tab and I was, scared to try it and all that. And then coming back from Asheville, I decided to go ahead and drop. And like we're in the car and, we put on the My War tape and I started coming on as the record's playing and we're flying, it's like these mountain roads and stuff. And everything was coming out of the speakers, just sounded supernaturally ferocious. And I remember Ginn's guitar sounded like a dragon to me. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. And Jim was getting real mad, because he was so scared of what was happening. And it was just like, what are you doing? What's happening? And he's trying to
minor detail. Nobody told me that anybody was dropping acid at the rest stop. So I remember, and it was dark, right? It was dark. It was at night when we were coming back, and I remember the blue signs. There were all these like blue signs going by, and William. The first thing I noticed, he kept like as the signs would go by, like this, and I didn't know what was happening. About an hour later, he tells me.
Well, Sean Devine was in our car
Brian,
tripping as well.
Say what?
Sean Devine was in the car I was in driving, tripping as well.
Do you remember seeing the cop that was pulled off on the side of the road and I kept going,
Oh, you were in the car
we're
with
in
us.
pursuit. We're in pursuit.
Yeah, we're in pursuit. The cops like stopped pulling over somebody and he thought we were catching up to the cops.
It's like,
Wait, we are disappointing some punk rock fans tonight, I think.
maybe, I don't know. Whatever. Won't be the first time. Won't be the last.
Or some veteran users of acid.
Also, you guys also strike me as the kind of people that didn't get rid of all of their other records of music that you've loved and liked because you heard. I was thinking about that today, actually. I was thinking how weird it was that even though it was really exciting, I didn't listen to punk rock and go, instant mohawk, I'm going to go get rid of all the records I love.
Right.
Today, and you guys never were like that, and like COC, Corrosion Conformity, were never like that. And even the time I saw you, what did you guys play in the middle of your set? You played a version of "Got to Choose" by Kiss with William singing, and I clearly remember that because that's like, well, a good song is a good song, and that's a good song, and
Right.
You guys always liked whatever you liked, and.
Danny Beard, who owns Wax and Facts, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he put out the first B-52s record.
He did,
And I mean, the guy he's an icon in Atlanta music. And he told us once that we had, like, of all the bands in Atlanta, we had the most eclectic taste of music. And I mean, I needed encyclopedias to keep up with William and Jimmy, because like they were always throwing out stuff. I'd never heard of Ornette Coleman. I'd never heard John Coltrane. I really got into Parliament Funkadelic and like the stuff that they were always talking about, and so, we loved our thrash and we loved our hardcore and we loved our punk rock. But, especially like when you listen to the later music, like you listen to Mask, and you hear like this jazz thing you know, and it's like, it ain't punk rock, but in a way it really is, you know, and it's like, and it was a direct result of like their influences, our influences, you know, it was pretty profound.
Yeah, I agree. There's shades of punk rock through most music, whether it's Bob Dylan going electric in 1966 and pissing off all of his fans that just wanted this other thing, or whether it's I don't know, Miles Davis, Ornette Coleman.
Coltrane was punk. I mean, it's an attitude, you know. It's just freedom. It's not being bound to any orthodoxy, and it's an individualism and a confidence to do what you want to do, how you want to do it, despite whatever the outside world is telling you, you know, and the conviction to back it up.
All those artists you just mentioned were all about constantly doing something new and different. And that was key to all the punk rock bands that we loved. Black Flag and the Bad Brains. Well, one record was going to be completely different than the next.
Yeah.
And I don't think that as we progressed, we didn't really lose our audience either. I think that they got it. You know, I mean, I'm sure that some people, you know, probably scratched their heads a little bit, but, you know, we never made any, you know, big announcement or pronouncement that, hey, we're changing and we're moving directions. It's just like, okay, this is the new song that we're doing. And, you know, we did it, and, you know, we committed to it. And when we delivered it, you know, it was 150%. And, you know, the people that got us, understood us, and appreciated us just said, okay, we're going with it. You know, we dig it. And
it was done with a lot of energy, you know, and I think they were responding to the energy, you know, just the raw energy of it, and the commitment, the emotional commitment to it is what they were responding to.
Sure. I'm going to ask a few more questions and let you guys go. So thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate it. I had questions I was wondering about for a long time, so thanks for answering them all. Yeah. Cool. I'll ask Danny this. The Peace compilation. I don't know if you have anything to do with it, but I'll ask you because I've asked you one question. But how did that song get on the Peace compilation? Did you have anything to do with that?
No, I just wrote the lyrics and I handed them to William one day. I wrote them at work one day and gave them to William. He wrote the song. I'm not sure if the song itself musically would have been written without the lyrics or not, but it ended up being a good thing that I wrote what were some pretty simple lyrics, and it ended up becoming a more than a simple song. But I don't know. Jimmy'd probably know more about how that. Didn't Ron from DMC write you or something?
Dave from MDC.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Dave from MDC.
Yeah, Dave from
Ron
MDC wrote a postcard. It was like, I'm putting together this compilation. I don't have any Neon Christ. And we didn't know that he knew about our band. We were big fans of his. And I thought Blind Patriot would be the best song, but Will knew that that Ashes, because it had the quiet intro and the quiet outro with the little 30 seconds of thrash sandwiched in between, would sound better on a record with, I don't know how many bands are on that thing. There's more than 50 bands.
75.
Yeah, and most of them are playing like not very dynamic hardcore. So, and we just lucked out with the placement because we're third on that record. And so, you know, it didn't take long for people to get to our song when you dropped the needle on side one.
Articles of Faith, who were really good. The Offenders, who were really good. I think they're like early on, and I mean, I haven't listened to that record.
CFA was like right before or after us, I think.
Right.
Cause for alarm.
You're right where you need to be. On a double record of mainly hardcore, you know, sort of records. That was a really popular song. Did you guys get a lot of attention?
Yeah, that's when the world really opened up in a more kind of I mean, that's when we started really getting letters from everywhere, and they started coming in much more frequently, and you know, people asking for the 7-inch record that we had put out earlier in the year. And so it allowed us to sell out of all of those pretty quickly. And it also, it got the name around. And it was the placement on the album, third track of side one, was very fortuitous, but also it was good that we had a cool looking page, because the album came with this kind of fanzine looking newsprint
I
booklet.
remember.
And so it looked, the fanzine looked like Maximum Rock and Roll looked back then. It was a newsprint thing, and our page looked really cool, you know, because Jim was always doing layout work in the in the room that we used for everything, in the attic at his folks' house. So he laid that page out, and it looked really good. Then the song was really cool, and really cool in a way that was unlike anything else that was on there, and all of that really contributed to it. And you know, I did write the music from those lyrics, because Danny brought, as I recall, Danny brought Blind Patriot and Ashes to Ashes written on 2 different sheets of paper on the same day. And so I took both of them right then and wrote the music to both of those songs and made them into tunes right then and there. And it was really quick, because everything was really quick back then. I knew exactly how it was supposed to sound the second I laid eyes on the words. And so the inherent rhythm in them, at least the rhythm I heard in my head for how they might be, how those lyrics might be said, gave way to the music instantly. And I felt like with Ashes to Ashes, that beginning almost sounded like it could be spoken, or it could be kind of sung, but in a way that was conversational and very quiet. It sounded like a plea. So let's make the beginning really quiet, and let's make it atmospheric, and let's try to conjure what the despair might look like living in the fear of the nuclear holocaust. Then let's give them the Holocaust, right, with the thrash part. And then let's take them out with a reprisal of the opening theme, but set to a beat now. So it goes atmospheric, then thrash, and then kind of, you know, post-punk rock, you know what I mean, to go out. And it worked. And it all happens in a few seconds, you know, so it kind of, you know what I mean? It's like this little pocket hardcore symphony, you know what I mean? It was cool. It worked out.
It's like the soundtrack to the movie The Day After, just condensed in a really short amount of time.
No, that would be after. No.
That's true. I forgot how I was talking to, but I was describing the preoccupation that we all had with nuclear war and trying to explain that to people. That, you know, it's like, you don't really understand. We really all thought that we were going to all blow up in a big nuclear holocaust any second, any fucking second. And then that's what fueled a lot of people's young people being kind of neurotic about it, actually, because you're just told this over and over. The Cold War, this and that. Half the songs you like by these bands, you know, this is preoccupation with nuclear war, or just getting like hear nothing, see nothing.
I was going to say, I'm going to go listen to Discharge when we hang up. So to this day, that's the scariest listening experience I've had. And when you're a young dweeb that doesn't know anything, there has to be the first time you're exposed to something like that. And that just exposed that idea just over and over and over. And then that fucking movie The Day After it came out. Finally, there's this Hollywood movie articulating everybody's fear, and it ends horribly and tragically. The camera pans away to, you know, it's just awful, you know. I'm sure you guys can remember the time period of that. Trying to explain.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, you know, half our songs were that.
just a few months ago, I was watching. I got this documentary channel thing on my Roku that it just plays random odd documentaries, and one of them was some kind of British documentary about the nuclear threat. It was all in black and white. And I was any moment I was like expecting to hear some sort of Discharge guitar, because you did like the threat of annihilation. You know, you know, it's like the whole documentary was like basically the intro to a Discharge song.
Right.
They said the thermonuclear device
has been likened to an enormous door slamming into the depths of hell. What were some of the other, like, maybe not I got a few more questions, but maybe not the later Neon Christ songs, but as far as putting together the earlier, faster stuff, what kind of I know it's not all, thrash, or the thrash at the time, Black Flag, I know, and the Bad Brains were very big, but what were some of the other contemporaries that you guys looked up to? Or maybe let me throw some names out, so that'll be actually a better way. You can all chime in. You brought up Scream. No one talks about that first Scream album. That's a fucking great record.
Still Scream.
We love it. It's one of our favorites. It remains one of my favorites from that period. They were great. As far as the early Neon Christ, at that time, I was really enamored with, I heard hyper fast thrash in my mind before I heard anybody play it, and so when I started hearing a band like Deep Wound out of Massachusetts, or DRI from Texas, it was like, oh, okay, like these guys are doing it, and they're doing it, they're doing it really bad. Or like the Neos out of Canada.
I love it.
The real, yeah, me too. And the real early Neon Christ, the hyper fast thrash thing was, kind of, I think just one of those collective consciousness things where you wanted to speed the music up even faster. Like, how fast can we get? And then hearing some of those other bands like Deep Wound and the Neos and the early DRI was like affirmation, to like, oh yeah, okay, and look at how they're doing it. Look at what can you pick up from how those guys are doing this or that, and you're writing your own songs, and then you hear them, and you hear it like on the Maximum Rock and Roll broadcast, the radio broadcast, or like the tapes of the radio broadcasts they used to circulate back then in '83, and that was really big. I remember the first time hearing Lose Anxiety song on the Maximum Rock and Roll broadcast. I was like, oh wow, listen to how they're doing it, and listen to how they're starting and stopping, and that was cool. It was like, that's what I'm talking about right there. That's what that's what it needs to sound like. that's what, and yeah, it was great. But of course, as we've said, there were always the other musical influences in there too. I was a musician before I ever heard punk rock, so I'd already been playing for a long time when the hardcore thing started happening in America. So even though the hyper fast thrash captured the imagination, it was really great, and even though we played that, there was always going to be a slightly different slant to it because of all this other stuff that was swirling around, and
Sure.
in my mind and stuff, in our
and also at the same time we were listening to all that, Ford had a really good, not only a good collection of punk and hardcore stuff, but also a lot of the underground metal stuff that was going on at the time that we were also really into. Like, he had this cassette of Metallica, like their first thing was a live cassette. And I remember us listening to that one and just being like, whoa, this is awesome.
Yeah, with Mustaine on guitar and stuff, and Hetfield saying, "You can loud yeller than that," like he twisted his words, like you can yell louder than that. It's like, you can loud yeller than that. But I loved how he stayed in character when he said it. It was like, totally straight faced it. It was great.
Yeah,
and I remember Danny and I going to Wax and Facts like the day the Ride the Lightning came out, because that was a great day. That was a great day. And going back to his house and just listening to it, start to finish, just flipping it over.
Right. It was very clear that they had been listening to some hardcore punk. And doesn't Kirk Hammett has a Discharge t-shirt on the back of that record, I believe?
Probably.
And we were like, okay, this is very cool.
Yeah, he does.
And just and to mention also that the photograph that's circulating on the internet of James Hetfield with Neon Christ written on his skateboard.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. You've never seen that?
I've never seen that.
I'll send it to you when we hang up.
Let's hear about when the actual reissue does come out. And I don't think I even know, actually. Is it coming out on anything other than an album? and when's the date, and what plans do you have, if any, surrounding the release of the Neon Christ 1984 material?
Vinyl,
Yeah, so-
vinyl LP only. It's record store day, June 12th comes out, and then we play a gig that day in Little Five Points in Atlanta. And so that's basically the deal right there. You know, comes out for
It's
record
going to
store
be
day.
free and outside.
All
Yeah,
ages.
the show is going to be free. Yeah, not the record.